So I think more than ever, the church needs resources. And that's really was my heart. I wanted to bring my experience in clinical counseling, my experience in biblical counseling, my experience in the counseling room, and just being able to say, okay, what can friends, mentors, pastors, leaders, lay counselors, or even professional counselors who want to approach this from a more biblical approach, what can they have kind of in hand to be able to say, okay, these are some things I really need to be aware of, since 70% of us are experiencing something traumatic in our lifetime.
Eliza, I was wondering, could you help us? What is a good working definition of trauma so that we kind of understand what are we talking about when we say trauma? Like what would that encompass? What would that
Yeah.
be defined as?
I think a lot of times we're asking that question because we hear things like, well, somebody said, I broke up with my boyfriend. I was so mad and it just traumatized me, or something.
Oh,
And it's like,
right.
okay, maybe you were really upset at the time, or maybe they weren't angry. They were just so hurt and it was traumatizing. There is a difference between just something that is upsetting, something that is distressing, something that is up, like a season of maybe suffering, and something that is traumatic. And I think it is actually helpful. And I can just, I have my book here. I can just read the definition that I think is most helpful. And I'll tell you why I think it's most helpful
Yeah.
after I read it. So, this is a definition from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health uh, Services Administration. So it's an acronym called SAMHSA, and if you're in the
Mhm.
clinical world, you've heard of that. But they have defined trauma this way. They said it's resulting from an event or a series of events or a life-threatening circumstance. Oftentimes, it is that it may not actually be life-threatening, but you will have perceived it to be life-threatening.
Mhm.
That is experienced as from the individual as emotionally and physically harmful, and that has lasting adverse or negative effects on a person's, and this is where it's important to keep in mind, the negative effects tend to breach these areas: a person's mental, physical, social, emotional, and spiritual well-being. And I love that this secular organization adds that spiritual component, because they do realize like it's going to impact us negatively in our physical, emotional, relational, but it's also that spiritual component as well comes into play. And really, trauma makes us theologians. It makes us question, it makes us explore, like, what do I really believe? Why do I believe that?